Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video, and today is going to be another instalment in my series Revisiting, where I look back on one particular album, and today we're going to look at a good one. This is Kate Bush and Never Forever, which dates back to 1980, and see some extremely distinctive Kate-esque artwork here. This record was Kate's first #1 album, and remarkably, doing some fact checking, it was the first album by a solo female artist ever to reach the top of the charts in the UK. So the record was recorded on, from September 1979 through to May 1980, and it was done at Abbey Road and Air Studios. Bit of a Beatles connection going on there. Let's put it around that way, it looks a bit better, doesn't it? And so you can see Kate there with her dress billowing upwards and all these amazing creatures spilling out of it. It's a fantastic gatefold. It was painted by an artist called Nick Price, who'd done the programme for Kate's 1979 UK tour. And on the back you can see Kate as some kind of strange bat-like figure floating through the sky. This album has always held a bit of a special place in my heart, really, so just a little bit of history with it. It was Kate's third record. We'll just quickly go through the previous two. So her first album was The Kick Inside from 1978. This is the one that had Wuthering Heights on it, and it was a fairly startling debut record. You know, anybody who was around back in those prehistoric times, the late 70s, will remember Kate on Top of the Pops doing Wuthering Heights. It was an extraordinary spectacle. I don't think anybody quite knew what to make of her at first. She was very individual and extremely young as well. She'd been nurtured onto the scene with the help of David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, had been teamed up with an arranger called Andrew Powell, and he'd helped her through the first album, A Kick Inside, and then the follow-up record Lionheart, which contained the hit single Wow. And so she'd been around for a couple of years already. Well, she'd been around for quite a few years, in fact. I mean, she was writing songs and getting ready for a major record label deal back since about 1974-75, really. So her talent had been a long time in the formation, and she was definitely ready to burst out onto the scene in 1978. But with her third album in 1980, Never Forever, she took the step of deciding that she wanted to produce herself. So she was quite keen to have that status, really, as a self-determined artist, somebody who was not going to have her vision of her own music refracted too much through somebody else. She did keep one person on board, though, from the previous records that she'd been working with. John Kelly, who'd engineered her first couple of albums. She brought him on board for Never Forever, and I think he got a co-producer's credit, but Andrew Powell was no longer there. She did keep quite a few musicians, though, who'd been on the first couple of albums, but she vastly expanded the range of musicians she was working with. I did a bit of a head count. I came up with a figure of 23. That might actually be quite approximate. 23 musicians played on Never Forever. So just a quick rundown of some of the guys that she had kept back from the previous record. So she still had Del Palmer, who was her partner at the time, her romantic partner, on bass and fretless bass, although he didn't play on every track on this record. Kate was moving into an area where she wanted to operate a bit like Steely Dan, really, and use musicians on certain tracks as and when she felt they had something to contribute. So Del found himself sidelined on a fair few tracks. She kept back Duncan McKay, formerly from Cockney Rebel, who'd been on the previous couple of albums. I think he'd been on keyboards or on piano previously. He was now on the Fairlight synth, and we'll get to that in a moment. Stuart Elliott, who was her long-time drummer, he'd been on the first two albums, and he was going to play on at least another 2 or 3, I think. Maurice Pert on percussion had been with her already. Paddy Bush, her brother, who'd always contributed to her records, he's on here playing a range of instruments: balalaika, sitar, koto, harmonica and mandolin. And Alan Murphy on guitar. He'd not played on the previous 2 records, but he had been in her touring band in 1979, and he would stay with her for a good few years to come. And then adding to those musicians, you had John Giblin on fretless bass. He plays the fretless bass on Babushka, and makes a really invaluable contribution to that song. The sound of the fretless bass really starts to come into the fore on this record for Kate. It's a very distinctive sound, one which I guess which is going to help to define quite a few 80s records. It has a very distinctive 80s sound to it, in a good way though, not in a dated way. Max Middleton, who'd played previously in the Jeff Beck band and with Nazareth, Kate brought him on board for this record, and he plays the Fender Rhodes piano, and there's some gorgeous Fender Rhodes stuff on this album. It has a kind of jazzy, late night kind of flavour to it, gives the songs a kind of late night ambience, a very cool and chilled out kind of sound. And then she teamed up with a couple of guys, John L. Walters and Richard James Burgess, who brought on board this Fairlight synth instrument, which was an instrument that was going to define the 1980s in many ways. I mean, it was used most famously perhaps by Trevor Horn on the Frankie albums, and it was, at the time, it was a very, very expensive piece of kit. State-of-the-art synthesizer, which was notoriously difficult to program. Hardly anybody could use it, but Kate brought it on for this record, and what it essentially did was allow her to sample real sounds. So you've got the sound of breaking glass at the end of Babushka, and also on the song Army Dreamers, there's a sample of the sound of a gun cocking as well. And there's various other sound effects weaved through the record. Kate was very influenced by Pink Floyd. She had been influenced by Pink Floyd. That idea of using found sounds on records, and the Fairlight synth allowed her to do that. The Floyd influence actually was going to come through in the music as well. She was a big fan of side 3 of the Wall album, which had come out in 1979. I think she was very moved by Roger Waters' anti-war sentiments on that record, and that certainly bled through into a couple of tracks on this record, specifically Breathing and Army Dreamers, which we'll get to in a moment. So so the sound on the record was vastly expanded. It was more impressionistic, it was more abstract. It's strange actually to compare it to the first 2 records. I think in some ways, Kate was definitely trying to forge ahead. She was finding her voice. I think she was simultaneously trying to simplify what she'd done previously, but also abstract it a little bit. There was a new kind of originality coming through the tracks. The first 2 albums are great, but I think sometimes some of the ideas are a little bit knotty, a little bit hard to decipher. I think on this record she really starts to find her own sound and her own voice, and I think that's largely due to the fact that she was now producing herself. I think her writing was becoming more focused and the songs were becoming tighter, the tunes were becoming more memorable. So I don't know whether it's her best album, but it's long been my personal favourite. So just a few more things to say. So there were three singles from this record. The first single was Breathing, which got to number 16 in the charts, and this is the final song on the album, and anybody who's seen the video for this will recall it. It's an incredible song, really. It's a song narrated from the point of view of a fetus in the womb who's essentially talking about the fact that it's too scared to come out because of nuclear war happening outside. It's an incredibly dark song, an extremely moving one. Features Roy Harper on vocals in the closing sections. The second single was Babushka, which was a big, huge number 5 single in the UK. The opening song on the album, one of several songs on the album which was inspired by some other kind of art form. There's quite a few songs on this record which are inspired by books or plays or films actually, and Babushka was inspired by the English folk song Sauve, in which a woman dresses up as a highwayman to test her lover's loyalty. And essentially in this song there's a woman, she's kind of a bit middle-aged now and maybe a bit frumpy, and she wants to find out if her husband still loves her, so she poses as a younger woman, sends him love letters, and then arranges to meet him, and sure enough, he falls for her. So her plan kind of backfires, really. She ends up having an affair with her own husband. It's a really strange, sort of messed up song, but it's set to this beautiful, tinkling, magical sounding music. I think Max Middleton and the fretless bass playing on this record really combine to make a very, very beguiling kind of sound, you know. And then the final song was Army Dreamers, which got to number 16 in the chart. Again, a really memorable video for this one. This is a song about a woman who is singing and lamenting her dead son who's been killed in the war. And the video for this song features Kate in the company of a parade of soldiers. And again, it's a very moving song. And then you've got some of the other songs as well. I mean, I'm not going to go through every track, but you've got The Infant Kiss, which is quite a creepy song actually. It was inspired by the 1961 film The Innocents, which in turn had come from Turn of the Screw by the writer Henry James. And in this song, really, it's about a woman who's she's nursing a baby, and she's finding herself becoming oddly attracted to this baby in a sexual way or in a romantic way. And you know, the idea is that the baby is in some way become possessed by the spirit of an adult male. And you know, again, it's got that kind of dark, slightly supernatural kind of feel to it. A very, very haunting song. Then you've got The Wedding List, which is just great fun. This was not a single, although there is a very, very memorable video for it, which you can watch on YouTube, which was done as part of a Christmas TV special that she did in, I think it was in 1980. So The Wedding List draws from the 1968 film The Bride Wore Black, which is a film by Francois Truffaut. Now, I haven't seen this film, but it sounds really deranged. It's a revenge film, essentially, about a widow who she gets married at the altar, and her husband is shot dead at the altar. Turns out that it's an accident. He's been shot dead by a hunting party, and she decides to go after each member of this hunting party and kill them, shoot them. So The Wedding List pretty much takes that story wholesale. It's a great fun song, a very theatrical song. I think it shows Kate really starting to show a humorous side, which maybe had not come through too much until this point. You know, she'd gained a reputation for being quite witch-like and maybe quite hippie-ish, and certainly quite mystical. But on this record, she starts to branch out. You know, some of the voices that she uses on that song are gruffer and just more kind of down to earth, I suppose. So then you've got the song Delius, Song of Summer, which was inspired by the 1968 TV film Song of Summer, which was about a young composer called Eric Femby, who'd been employed by the English composer Delius to help him transcribe his music, because he was suffering from ill health at the time. I saw that film many, many years ago. It's a great film, actually. And I don't know if this song is musically inspired by Delius. It's a very abstract song. It's led with a drum machine, and there are some samples on there. You've got a male and female voice on there. The music on this album is almost impossible to describe, really. You have to hear it to kind of grasp what it sounds like. The album is definitely shot through with a kind of haunting darkness, really. And it did really well for her, like I said at the start. Her first #1 album, it was a big hit. And she came in with quite a few plaudits at the end of the year. The Melody Maker and Sounds, excuse me, both voted her the best female artist of 1980. And you know, there were various other critics queuing up to pour praise on this record. A few critics didn't like it. A few thought she was maybe stretching herself out, maybe into certain areas that were maybe too experimental, and that certainly started to happen big time on the next record, The Dreaming, where she almost went mad making that record, I think, and she definitely took a very sharp left turn. Never Forever, though, I think, still shows her with one foot in the previous two records, looking ahead, starting to look ahead into that world of 80s sampling culture, but still rooted in quite easily digestible pop songs, which are still shot through with this kind of haunting darkness. So there we go. That's Kate Bush, Never Forever. If you haven't heard it, give it a listen at your earliest opportunity. It's a great record. It's one of Kate's best, I think. Right, that'll do for now. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.
She said, I'll put him on